Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arwen. Thanks for everyone for being here. I'm sure you're thinking now how lucky you are to not have to go out in the frigid temperature to get lunch. So enjoy your lunch. Basically, I just really want to. When Leo approached me to do this talk, he's it's something that's really interesting, and basically what we want to talk, what Leo's going to talk about today. So it's going to be a little different than our typical Bits and Bytes where we're going to interview him. So I promise we'll definitely get him in the hot seat one of these days. But for now, he's going to do a special presentation for us. So I just want to kind of talk about this slide really quickly. You see Uber, Amazon, Airbnb, Warby Parker. So these are companies. What do you see are a commonality of these companies? Anyone? Besides that there's Uber is successful, no pun intended.
The web presence?
They are technology driven.
They are technology driven, but the main commonality of this, yes, they are technology driven, but they are all disruptors. What disruptors are companies that are innovative, but have disrupted a industry that's always kind of done its own thing, right? That it had a standard process. So you look at Uber, the taxi company. You go out there and hail a cab, but now Uber has revolutionized the way of doing that. Same with Airbnb, Amazon. You buy stuff online now. How many people buy stuff online? So I'm going to stop talking because you're really here for our guest. So our special guest I'll introduce, I'll kick it off, he started at NYP as a volunteer. He started at NYP when he had hair. He is a poster child and the face of NYP Careers, a website, and he is now the VP of Converse Technologies. Please join me in welcoming Leo Bodden.
Just to clarify a couple of those lies. Thank you so much. I did not have hair when I started it. So, but I will pick up from where Arwen left off. So thank you so much, Arwen. And I'll present the question to you again, and I'll ask you what. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Can someone here tell me what made the Uber's Netflix? What gave them the ability to be as disruptive in their industries as they have been? Accessibility, that's exactly right. I would argue that they've been so disruptive because of the consumerization of IT. So everyone today is connected, everyone has access to information technology, which then gave all those companies that you saw there the ability to just go in and with very little investment. I mean, think about the fact that Uber today has been able to do everything they've been able to do without owning any of the infrastructure and without hiring any of the people. So I just want to bring your attention to the conversation, to the speech that General McChrystal gave at the kickoff. Did everyone see it, go to it? So General McChrystal talked about the structure of the United States military, and he really focused on how the rules of engagement have changed. So he basically described our military as being hierarchical, very well-funded, efficient. He actually went on to describe that we have had the best military the world has ever seen. Again, for those same reasons. We're so efficient, we're well-funded, etc. So if you would have put our military against any other country's military, one could argue that they could have easily come out on top. That all happened until our military went to Iraq and Afghanistan. They were not prepared for the changes in the environment. They were not prepared for a group of people that were seemingly unstructured and unfunded to push back as much as this group has. And like in the situation with Netflix, like in the situation with Uber, I would argue, and he actually even stated the fact that it's happened, again, because of the consumerization of IT. Specifically, the fact that everyone is connected, everyone has access to information technology, and it's enabled them to morph as the situation has morphed. So now what I want to do is actually talk about some of the things that are impacting the healthcare industry, because we are seeing similar issues pop up. We've been protected as an industry by regulatory bodies, but so many things are happening at the same time. It is important to consider these factors as we make our plans for the future. So the first thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is the fact that we are the most expensive healthcare system in the world. In 2013, and I'm using 2013 figures because of the fact that those are the actual figures. Everything else are projections. So when those become available, then you can actually present those numbers. But in 2013, our healthcare system cost the United States $2.9 trillion. To give you an idea of what that means, it's actually $120 billion more expensive than the entire GDP of France. So understanding how expensive we are, it's also important for us to understand where these costs, these dollars are going. So I'm sorry if I'm blocking. So where these dollars are going. So if you look at, and actually I should have picked different colors, I didn't realize that it was going to be so dark. But if you look at the blue side here, it's basically hospital care, professional services, things like physician private offices, clinics, etc. And then the red that you see there, that's pharmaceuticals, medical devices, etc. So all that accounts for about $2 trillion of that total cost. So we know where the money's going, and I really wanted to focus on those specifics because they really are what we are. That is how we generate our revenue. So now let's look at where the money is coming from. Again, the blue, you probably can't see it, but the blue buckets are Medicare and Medicaid funds. The orange that you see there, or probably yellow, I can't tell now, is private health insurance. And then the orange-red that you see up there is out-of-pocket. For Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid specifically is $449 billion that's being spent on Medicaid, about $6 billion for Medicare, and almost $1 billion for private health insurance. Now, out-of-pocket is about $339 billion. It's important I bring these up because for us, our revenues are actually 30% Medicare, 30% Medicaid, and almost 40% private health insurance, with about 1.6% coming from out-of-pocket. So because 1.6% is out-of-pocket, I want to refocus the attention on the things that really matter to us and matter to you all. And that's what are the expenses associated with healthcare to these different groups. 2013, again, you're talking about $2 trillion were being spent by these organizations. And as you can see, by 2022, it's expected to grow to $3.6 trillion. So when you consider some of the forces, some of the impact that we're going to see, these groups are actually going to do whatever they can to lower their costs, i.e. take money from healthcare organizations. So we're IT people. We are very data-centric. We're all about the numbers. But we tend to forget why we are here. And so we're actually here for the patient. I know living at 38th Street is very difficult to realize that, but that's the situation, and that is what we're here for. Now, I bring up Rory. The reason I bring up Rory is because it was a story told to me by a friend of mine who was actually sitting here today. And Rory was 12 years old. He had a stomach ache. His parents took him to the doctor. His family pediatrician. His family pediatrician looked at him, couldn't tell what was going on, so he figured, he needed fluids anyway. Sent him over to the ER. He gets to the ER, fortunately not our ER, and they put him on IV. He's doing much better. They sent him home. So this is the friend that I was referring to. So, but So I had actually, before it was printed in the newspaper, Joel had shared that story with me, and it was pretty disturbing because then now we're talking about a statistic. And we're talking about a statistic because everything that happened before and into his death could have been preventable. The doctors in the ER did not take into account the information that was presented by his pediatrician. The information from the labs was not used before he was discharged, and the information from our from their vital sign monitors, so used to saying our, was not used to make that decision. So all those aggregated together would have pointed to the fact that something else was going on. In the end, he died of septic shock. So a staggering statistic that I wanted to share with you is the fact that preventable medical errors is actually the number 3 killer in the United States. Oh, sorry. Better? It's actually the number 3 killer in the United States. These statistics are a little bit flawed, mostly because all the data does not exist. They don't live in one place. But what could be accounted for is about almost 100,000 cases per year. A more staggering statistic is the fact that serious harm, the statistic for serious harm is probably 10 to 20 times greater. And then the cost of those mistakes is somewhere around 73 to probably $700 billion a year. Again, it's a tenfold difference, but that's because the information isn't completely accessible. So, how did we get here? Actually, I heard General McChrystal talk about that and bring that up. He actually said they're well-intentioned people. Everyone here wants to do the right thing. The problem that I see is that we want to do the right thing, but we've interpreted the regulations inappropriately. So specifically, what we've seen is that there's considerable insulation due to regulatory bodies. So what that means is that today, no one can just practice healthcare. No one, if you're not licensed to practice in New York, but you have a license in Florida, you can't practice in New York. We've been protected in that sense. Some of you know that the FDA, or actually even the medical devices, are heavily regulated. And so typically you go and have a conversation with whether it's an EHR, whether it's a GE medical devices, etc. Everyone throws the FDA card in our direction. So what ends up happening is that we end up with broken processes. I mean, think of the EHR. We also have, because of this supplier-driven workflows, what ends up happening is that we have the inability to standardize. So we have too many point solutions. We have, a situation where, like in Rory's case, data actually dies at the device, is never actually aggregated. And so you can see how all these things, as you begin to aggregate them, become a problem for the healthcare delivery. We're also risk averse. Any of you that has sat in a room with nursing or with the clinical teams has seen that we spent years to make a very simple decision. It's a huge problem. We can't adopt new technologies, new ways of doing things, because we are healthcare. If we make a wrong decision, somebody does. So I figured I would pick the most self-deprecating picture I could. You can't see it, but there's a pager, a Cisco phone, and another pager on that belt. So we are, because of the limitations that I described before, we have a situation where our nurses today have to walk around with a tool belt. And so what we expect them to do is tell their people, if you need me for my regular nursing duties, call me here. If you need me for my charge nurse duties, call me here. And if you need me for my rapid response team duties, call me here. You can see even us having access to technology, we haven't been able to put together, aggregate all the information that already exists. So now we have some of the problem, we have the cost, we have the fact that we are the most expensive healthcare system in the world. There's what we're doing for the future. One of the initiatives that we've seen from our senior leadership team is relates to the road to number one. I wanted to use this structure to point at the fact that we're all the same. So like the US military in the past, being the best simply means that when you're going up against like organizations, you know exactly what to expect. You can adjust, and then you can move up the stack. Worst case scenario, we copy what number one is doing, and eventually, if you're funded, you go to number one. The problem is the landscape is changing. So because of that cost, because of the issues I described before, you now have the health insurance companies, the big five, what used to be the big five, merging together. They're going to be the big three. What that means is with that new scale, they have an ability to negotiate even further. Again, 40% of our revenues come from this group. So consider some of the impact. They're going to innovate, they're going to come after us. There's a lot of money. Because there's a lot of money, even the high entry barriers seem low because of the potential ability to profit from what's out there. And so CVS is now at our doorstep. They're competing directly with us. Walgreens is competing directly with us. Watson, so IBM is now aggregating all the information that I was talking about. They will compete directly with us. Telehealth services, you no longer are limited by physical location. You can video to your doctor. So all these services come in, are competing with us. Urgent care centers, you see them everywhere. So I think you get the picture, a lot of entry into the market. And then there's just a general intensification of competition. You know, technology, as I described, eliminates the limitations caused by physical location. There's also the fact that size matters. So our competitors over to the east, Northwell now, they're growing at a rate of probably 2 or 3 hospitals per year. On the other side, to the west, you have Cleveland Clinic that's at our doorstep. They are here, they're competing with us. And then we already talked about the fact that companies like CVS, et cetera, are competing now in our segment of the market. They're competing directly with us. So why does that happen? What's going on? Goes back to what McChrystal said. It's, I see that convergence. I see what you see there as, that I call convergence, as the consumerization of IT. Everyone is connected. Everyone has access to technology. A 12-year-old today can actually call up Amazon, build a 10,000 server farm, and begin to test his or her algorithms almost in a day. That was unheard of before. Everyone's talking about analytics, so everyone's focused on getting all the data, aggregating all the data. And then there are more sources of data. I can guarantee there are a few people here who have Fitbit. If you don't have the Fitbit, you have the Apple Watch. All those things are gathering data, passing it up to some cloud, which can then be used to make some decisions in the future. And finally, you have smart machines. IBM has built Watson, and they're making it freely accessible to the masses. Google is doing the same thing. So all these things aggregated together, we already talked about it, eliminate entry barriers. We're shifting from what we have today, which is basically experiential. Our doctors, best doctors in the world, but they only know what they know. They're not using all the information. We can go back to what happened with Rory. Then you have the standardization. So we will see that there's going to be more of a push for efficiency, and that efficiency will then drive automation. It will eliminate the need for people to actually touch things. That eliminates errors. Again, going back to Rory. So our new landscape looks something like this. So these are all the groups, and not all the groups, a simplified view of the groups as they exist today. With information technology, what's happening is that they now have the ability to share information at the speed of thought. Those issues of the past are gone. And what I mean by that, Google, Apple, Microsoft all got into healthcare 5-7 years ago. You know what happened? They failed miserably. But today that's gone. They're coming back in. Google's back in healthcare. IBM is back in healthcare. Microsoft is back in healthcare. And it has everything to do with the fact that now the infrastructure exists for them to do it very, very cheaply. In case you can't figure out what this is, that's what that is. That's a change in our environment. It's no longer a structure. We are no longer going up against like organizations. The good thing is, we are made up of these institutions. Columbia University, Cornell University, they're medical groups. You know that we've been growing, so we've been acquiring regional hospitals. So there's a lot of very, very, very smart people. The problem is, I don't think they're all going in the same direction. And so if we're not all going in the same direction, at best, you will get some marginal benefits. At best, some incremental benefits. But what's coming our way is disruptive, it's transformative. So we need to be a lot faster. Like Dr. Corwin said during the kickoff, we need to get on the boat, we need to get those groups on the boat. And by the way, even though I'm referring to these very, very large organizations, there are teams within those teams. There are teams here. We first need to pull in the same direction. And if we actually do that, then what ends up happening is that we're somewhat situated something like this. We have the main group up on top, then we have all the other groups. And then with information technology, we're actually able to get everyone together and get us to where we need to go fast. We can't wait. So, just in case you didn't get the point, I wanted to make sure that it was clear. We need to make sure that we speed up, because we need to go after a group that's going much faster, is better funded, but the one thing they don't have is the level of people that we have. So as I close out, I want to just bring up a prediction that was made back in the late 90s. And I was at a Cisco Networkers event, and John Chambers, so this is John Chambers, the ex-CEO of Cisco, he made a comment. He said that phone calls would be free. And we all went crazy. It's all we talked about. So I ask you a question. Does anyone know what the third largest telecom provider in the world is today? Mr. Castro. It's Microsoft. And it's Microsoft because they bought Skype. Has anyone ever paid for a Skype phone call? Do we know why it happened? Consumerization of IT. Everyone's connected. You don't have to worry about building out the copper infrastructure. You don't have to worry about all the things that we needed to worry about in the past. And so now they're able to become the largest telecom provider, or the third largest telecom provider in the world, without doing any fiber, without doing any copper, without investing anything but the cost of purchase for Skype. And so finally, I'll leave you with this. So if you ask yourselves, if the right algorithm, that 12-year-old kid, by the way, that can now use Amazon for $90 an hour for 10,000 servers. So if the right algorithm came along, would healthcare organizations, as we are, be able to sustain it? Thank you. call to action.
So what are your suggestions moving forward? What is NYP supposed to do?
So there are a couple of suggestions that I have. I think, what I mentioned before, maybe even copying what the best are doing is one quick win. There's the fact that we are very slow at making decisions, and so going with best practices. We are going to have to prepare for the shift to the cloud. Why? Because sometimes we have a need, we have an immediate need, but we don't have the ability to respond. And so you've actually heard, and one of the most powerful things that I've heard Daniel state was, you have 70% of the information, make a decision and go. Because what happens is, that next 20%, that next 25% that will lead you to make that decision and go, during that time frame, somebody else catches up, and they might have made the decision and went. And so we fall far behind everybody else.
You mentioned in your slide that one of the problems is the supplier person that's running. So
Yep.
what does that imply?
So that,
Repeat the question.
yeah, so sure. So one of the things that you saw in the slides was the fact that we are supplier driven. So you sit down with any vendor, the vendor actually tells you how things are going to be done. And so this is a big call to action. We need to drive the vendors. They come in, they drop the FDA card. FDA card we know will not allow us to move forward. You stop the conversation. We know better than anybody else what's actually necessary for our business. And so we need to actually drive those suppliers. It could very well be that we become that force that goes to the FDA to define how these things should be written. I mean, I had a situation where GE came in with a solution that was phenomenal. It was next generation. Specifically what it did was, it through the use of software, it minimized the need for radiation when you're doing a scan of someone. They built it, they sent it out to the FDA. Without looking at anything, they took the white paper from IBM, I think it was at the time, just presented it. They came back. It required a fiber connection. It required a copper connection. And so because of that one item, that meant that you were limited to distance. And so you need to build an entire room because the specs called for an entire room. So we would have had to spend $2-3 million just to build a room to put this system out there. All we had to do was replace the card. And in the end, we just didn't allow it. They had to replace the card.
Has anybody thought about using other industries' models for gathering information? For example, right, the criminal justice system, right? They have all the information that databases on DNA, all what the criminal did, all the information needed, right? Could anybody consider rather than innovate? This is something that's already out there, right? That you consider using that type of software.
I think what we'll probably see, and if we don't do it, somebody else will, is the fact that people will begin to aggregate unstructured data. And so you're not going to need that software to do that for you. Google is a prime example. Google gets all the information in the world, puts it together, and as you start typing, it begins to make decisions on the things that you're looking for. As you begin, their algorithm actually makes it so that the best option for this particular question is what gets presented to you. So imagine in a situation where we're gathering petabytes of data, we can actually go through that entire system, and our doctors can actually make those decisions based on all that information that has already been aggregated for you. In the beginning, it won't be so easy, but as you begin to make decisions and confirm, the system has to evolve and change, and you confirm again and change, and confirm again and change. Because there is so much already, we have hundreds of applications, I would probably argue that the best case scenario is one in which you aggregate without having to convert. Conversions for us are very, very painful and lengthy.
So I was very impressed by this presentation. I actually watched it probably 3 times. And so I was so convinced that this would work. And the first thing I did, obviously, is I brought it home. And I told my wife about it and see if we could institute something like that at home. And I got met with a lot of resistance. It was denied right up front. So my question to you is, how do we take what we learned from him, what he's instituting? How do we take that and bring it to the job and somehow bring it from the ground up to start everybody thinking that way?
So that's what I'm hoping we get from this conversation. This is my call to action. And the reality is, before we start telling people that they need to change, we first need to change. And so I think we know that all the teams here, each team has priorities. We need to adjust those priorities. We need to refocus, so you remember that ring. You need to refocus the pull to go in one direction. We need to get in the boat and all row in the same direction. But we first need to do it. And it can be done, it's just not easy. So this is the first step, by the way.
As I was listening to you, I was thinking about the examples that you chose for the disruptors. And they were disruptors is not necessarily a bad word or a good word, but most people think of, okay, you're tipping the boat, you're standing up. So these companies came out of nowhere and pushed and took advantage of technology and the things that exist today.
Yep.
And the reason why they became successful was because there was a hole. They filled the hole using the current technology.
Right.
And that hole was created by the industry that did not take advantage of the technology.
Right.
Or couldn't because their structure, it would have been too expensive for them to switch. So which are we?
Both.
We're both.
Yeah, that's the situation. My fear, in all honesty, is that we don't see it. That we might make the argument to ourselves that Microsoft failed the last time it came into healthcare. That Google failed the last time. I don't think that happens this time. I think now there are things being worked on. I know now there are things being worked on that could be used to make decisions that don't require someone to walk into the hospital. So specifically, based on your what you described to the doctor, you can, with 99.9% effectiveness, you can actually diagnose and forget about shoving a pipe down somebody's throat. So we know better than anyone what's required. Unfortunately, to your point, the structure sometimes does not allow it, or sometimes we're blinded by the past. And the reality is, as I mentioned before, the rules changed. The past no longer applies. When the US military went into Iraq, they assumed they were the best military in the world. And then there was a kid on a phone with a $30 pipe bomb that destroyed a $2 billion tank. So that's the situation we're in right now. Only those kids with pipe bombs have billions, probably trillions of dollars, or at least funds at their disposal.
Just to kind of add to what you're saying, I feel like you made the comparison between the behemoth and we're kind of so if you compare it to Uber, we're kind of like the TLC, right? TLC didn't want to do, they thought they had monopoly, they didn't want to do anything, TLC companies, and they take advantage of technology, and Uber saw a gap in that, and Uber came in, and now TLC is saying, oh, it's, you're playing playing not fair, you're not uncompetitive, not competitive, but in actuality, there really is no policy or regulation for that type of company because this is the first that's ever been. So I think we should learn from the TLC and kind of open our eyes, right? I think that's what Leo's really trying to communicate, open our eyes and think outside the box on how we can start competing and not being blindsided by
disruptors.
That's very true, except you're talking, we are
Right, you
a
were
facility
kind
of 17,000 individuals. Some have more responsibility and control. And if 10% of that 17,000 understand this, how do they convey that message instead of bringing it home and saying, this is the way we gotta do it? And saying, no, you're out in the doghouse. Okay? So, and the sad thing about it is you had the solution, but you didn't give it correctly, and you missed the point for the hospital. So we need marching orders. We need direction so that we are effective in the 10% is effective in conveying the information to the rest.
I think, and I agree. I think IT more than most organizations within our organizations. So more than most other teams of teams, we have access to information. We actually see all that's going on. It's distributed today, but we see all that's going on. So having the ability to take all that, package it, and then present it to someone can actually make that change that you're talking about. But it all, again, comes back here.
Yeah, I was thinking about, there are a couple of things that you said that kind of worry me. One of them is that it's important for us to, all be rowing in the same direction. What's the right direction? That's the thing that worries me also about the military metaphor for us, because one of the key reputations of the military is that they were, in terms of strategy, very good at fighting, making plans to fight the last war.
Right, exactly.
And what we're looking at and what the disruptions in our industry are about is that the next war is going to be very different from the war we're fighting now.
Right.
Which brings us back to the problem with stealing best practice.
Right.
Because best practice is what works today, but best practice is the best for today's situation. It's not necessarily the best for tomorrow's situation. And probably to get to what will be the best practice for tomorrow is, and be ready with it tomorrow, is to look at what was the best practice today accomplishing? Why did it work best today? What is the goal involved? And taking the goal and looking at the disruptions that are going on and trying to predict where the best practices are going so that we can intercept them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So one of the points that I tried to make that maybe I didn't make when I showed you the structure of each of the organizations that we're going up against as we shift to number one was that structure. We know what they do. We can copy what they do.
But they're not going to be the enemy
They're
in the
not
next
going
war.
to be the enemy in the next war. And so that's the reality. We have to make projections. We have to make assumptions. Some of the things that we have today, we know that technology is evolving at a rate of basically doubling every 18 to 24 months. The capability, the capacity of technology to solve problems, doubling every 18 to 24 months. That means that if you take the entire history of technology, of innovation, in 2 years, you will see that entire 5,000 years of history just turned over. And so you have to actually make those projections. You have to take the leap and make an assumption and hope that you actually get to where that, I don't want to use another metaphor that I stole from somebody else, but where the puck is going to be. But you're right, you're 100% correct. If we don't have this conversation, we'll just sit there, we'll copy what number one is doing, and to your point, you saw everyone else coming after us.
Another thing that you pointed out in your overview is that one of our situation, defining our situation is we're slow to make decisions. But in the same discussion, you're referring to the military. The military is just like us, it is huge. And when something becomes state-of-the-art to military, it's already been in the industry for 10 years.
Yep.
When I was in the Navy, I worked on the latest and greatest three-dimensional air search radar. That was at every single airport for the past 5 years already.
Mm-hmm.
So, wouldn't you think we would need to actually be responsive with that to the everything that's coming up, we need a way to identify decisions to fast track?
That's exactly, I mean, that's the point. That's what's happening. You know, we walk into a room, we sit there for 2, 5 years, don't make a decision, do absolutely nothing. Just so you all know, 2010, we actually put together what became the best document for alarm management in existence. And then we did absolutely nothing because we needed to make a decision. We presented that to our friends over at Johns Hopkins, copying what somebody else has done, and they actually have the best practice built for alarm management in the country. So you're making, that's the point. That's why we're having this conversation. We need to begin to drive decisions. Laura Faris is now making those statements. You're gonna go, this is the best part, run. Don't wait. Daniel is saying 70% of the information, you have 70% of the information, run, don't wait. Because if we do wait for the 95%, then you have Johns Hopkins who took our information and has the best program in the country. Frank?
So, understanding that the status quo is no longer a model that we can continue to operate on, what's your position on the ability to provide, to give those members in IT that empowerment, right? Because what we have found from the alarm management example from 2010 is the barriers and
Right.
the barricades. And obviously we do understand the regulatory stuff, but what's your position on empowerment of the individual to make a decision?
So I won't speak about my position. I'll actually speak about what I've heard from Daniel, and that's exactly what he's talking about. His objective is to empower the individuals, make the decisions. He told all of us when he came in, you have 70% of the information, run. Some of the conversations that we need to have, to Frank's point, are around how we do innovation. You know, we can't innovate from the top. That makes absolutely no sense. So for one, at the top, you have no idea how things work. And so what has to happen is that innovation needs to be bottom up. So the 700, 800 people that we have on our team of teams should be the ones that are driving. That's not going to happen unless we do what Frank just said. We need to empower the individual to make that decision, to make sure that we're able to do these things.
Right, said, no, right, so now what do I do with that kind of assistance?
I'll
Take
leave
where
that
it's
alone. So
And then she says, I gotta go.
there you go. That's the answer. You gotta go.
Is NYP and its competitors willing to innovate together to combat the CVS, the Walgreens, the Google?
I've had splintered conversations. So I know that some of our friends over at Kaiser definitely want to do that. I think eventually that's something that has to happen. We own the data. That data that Watson is going to use, that data that Google is going to use, is actually our data. If we then pull together, that might be a game changer. So that's something that should be thought through. Just so you all know, there recently was a co-op set up between a number of companies, UPS being one of them. They were fairly large companies, and their objective is to do exactly what you just described. They don't want to negotiate with those payers, with the insurance companies. They don't want to negotiate with us. And so what they're going to begin to do is acquire their own data as a team, so that then they can make decisions who is the cheapest and who gets the best results. That's where you're going.
It
Sorry.
seems make more sense to work together with the disruptors rather than the old people you compete against.
So I would have one argument against that, and it's that these disruptors they built a business because they don't have any cost. So Uber came in, they invested nothing. A few $100,000 to build up a supercomputer, right? They had somebody code the program, and then they went after things. If we enable those disruptors, we're actually giving them money to begin to build up those companies, those business plans. Eventually, they come back around and they eat our lunch. Microsoft,
You copy them. Do whatever,
If
they put
possibly,
the money, you could
yeah.
start.
It's possibly. I honestly, as long as we're focused on the patient and we're able to impact change for the patient, i.e., get as close to 100% reliable as possible, then I would much rather block those disruptors than enable. But first, we have to focus. This is all about the patient.
Just a couple of points. I mean, I think you said we have the data. I don't think Google's getting hospital data. As far as I know, they're mining the billions of emails that are coming back and forth, and they're pulling out just everyday conversations, translating that into medical, running it through algorithms, coming up to conclusions on outcomes and things like that. And as I said, they don't have any overhead for that. They don't have to actually keep a physical structure of hospitals' lights turned on. They don't have to worry about PHI regulations and all the other regulations at all different levels of government. They don't have to actually worry about medical malpractice, and they don't actually have to take care of patients. But also look at it. In Europe, they're starting to looking at limiting Google and other companies' invasion of privacy, and that could flip it all on its head also. If we were to do that here in the United States as well, it would be very limited in terms of what they could do with that.
So I agree. Google proper, Google search engine doesn't have all the data. But like Watson, and to the point you made before, they're getting the data from healthcare organizations. And so they're going to use that data eventually. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that we're going to sit down with IBM, we're going to pump all the data over, they're going to make better decisions, and then we become a shell that people use to basically operate when necessary. So one last question, I think it's 1 o'clock. Okay, so thank you so much for listening to me.